thanks for having me on today. Today we're going to be talking about API security beyond the scan. My name is Corey Ball. I have over 15 years of experience in IT and cybersecurity. I'm the author of Hacking APIs, the founder of the APPSEC University, which is a completely free educational platform for all things API security related. We just actually crossed over a major milestone. We have over 100,000 students now. And outside of that, I just made a pretty big move and I've started my own company called hAPI Labs. So I'm the founder and CEO over there. And with hAPI Labs, I perform cybersecurity consulting services, API penetration testing, AI application testing, so on and so forth. Today, we're going to be talking about APIs and how they continue to be a leading attack vector. We're going to talk about some shortcomings of vulnerability management programs when it comes to APIs, and why APIs require specific testing in order for organizations to earn confidence in their cybersecurity programs. So why are attackers going after APIs? Well, this helps build the case. From 2019, we see that 83% of all web traffic is API related. That stat continues to fluctuate, but there are more and more APIs being rapidly deployed to the internet. The global API management market was valued at $4.2 billion in 2022. It's expected to reach upwards of 30 to 35 billion by 2032. In 2023, there were over 120 million Postman collections with 1.3 billion API requests created within a year. So APIs are prevalent, they're all over the place. The reason that attackers are using them is because they are the path of least resistance. Insecure APIs are a gateway to the resources that attackers are going after in the first place. So when we talk about the current state of APIs, more and more organizations are depending on these APIs to be the pipeline that enables one of the world's most valuable resources, data, to flow, to have business logic to be able to be used. And organizations across industries are depending more and more on APIs. As we'll see in some of the research that I'm about to show, API testing is a top priority for organization, but security testing has not been the same priority. So as you can see here, the respondents that took this questionnaire by Rapid APIs, this is the state of APIs. You can see that organizations all over the place are leveraging APIs, whether it's healthcare, government, financial services, or technology. APIs are being leveraged. And you can see here, API testing is important to these organizations, but security testing comes up near the bottom as far as the importance of the testing that's being done and the types of tests that are being done within these organizations. So you have this mix of they're being leveraged all over the place, they're prevalent, but security testing of APIs is falling to the wayside. So why are attackers going after the APIs? Why are they the path of least resistance to get to the data? The classic hacking process included, discovering an entry point from outside the network. So an attacker goes after an organization, they have to scan all open ports and services for that organization to find the right pathway in, get past the firewall, get into the network, land on a device, and move laterally across that network until they can discover the data that they're looking for. Then they have to find a way to exfiltrate that data out of the network, all without getting caught and all without setting off any alarms. As you can see here on the kill chain, it's just spelling that out more. They have to go through all of these steps in order to gain access to that data. This is a MITRE ATT&CK. You can see here that one of the small steps throughout this is exploit public facing application, which is typically through the API. Meanwhile, instead of doing all of that work, they can go through, find an internet facing vulnerable API, use that vulnerable API, and exploit weaknesses that are a part of it. So that secure data that organizations have put layers and layers of security around, now with vulnerable APIs, if they're not locked down, an attacker on the outside can gain direct access to that data. And you can see that again here. Instead of going through all of these steps to lead to a breach, if there's an exposed internet-facing API, then it's a direct pathway to that sensitive data. Here you can see a 2023 case of T-Mobile API security breach. This impacted 37 million customers. An external facing API didn't require authentication, and an attacker was able to get access to all of those. One of my favorite breaches to talk about is Optus, because it's a really interesting case where APIs were leveraged, and you have this back and forth that was fairly public between Claire O'Neill, the MP over cybersecurity, and the corporate organization of Optus and their response to this. And so Optus is one of the largest data breaches in Australian history. Nearly 40 to 50% of the entire population of Australia was impacted by this. Optus, their chief executive, called this a sophisticated attack. Meanwhile, publicly on Twitter at the time, Claire O'Neill is publicly responding, what happened at Optus wasn't a sophisticated attack. And I like to talk about API breaches as being similar to a magic trick. And so the first time you see the magic trick and you don't know how it works, it looks sophisticated, it looks complicated. But once the trick is revealed and how it works, suddenly it doesn't appear to be that complicated anymore. And this is the case with the API. So Optus's chief executive, they know the cybersecurity budget. They know the teams that are involved with this, and they know they've put up all of these layers of defense along the way. So from their perspective, our enterprise vulnerability management program, our cybersecurity program, has put up these walls, and we're heavily defending it with a large budget, I'm sure. So there's no way this is a simple attack. This must be sophisticated. And then Claire O'Neill's perspective, once she finds out the magic trick of, there's an exposed API. That exposed API didn't require authentication. That exposed API didn't require authorization or have that in place. So an attacker was able to continuously make requests to this API until they gathered millions and millions and millions of instances of PII, personal information. And in that case, there's more to the story. There's essentially the attacker decided they were going to ransom off the data to Optus. It sort of does have a happy ending where some of the data was leaked, but in the end, the attacker gave in and didn't release all of the data that they threatened to. So why is this happening? Well, I believe organizations are confident in their insecure APIs. And so you can see here, this is a no-name survey that was performed. 71% of respondents reported confidence in their API protection. 67% are confident in the tools that they're using to scan and test their APIs. Meanwhile, 76% of them experienced an API security incident in the last year. How does all of that make sense? I think this is all related, that most vulnerability management programs are not effectively testing their APIs. So what's going on is they're using tools that they've used for decades to defend their web applications. And now with REST APIs exponentially being released into production globally, and with the hundreds of APIs that can be found within a single organization, they're using those same tools to test the APIs. They're getting back false negatives from these tools. So they're going out and scanning the applications, the APIs that are vulnerable to all of the OWASP top 10, which we'll get into later on. And the scans are coming back relatively clean. And they're taking that and reporting back and saying, our APIs are secure. Look at the scans. They don't show any results. So I've gone and done some of this legwork to demonstrate this for us today. This is a scan of a deliberately vulnerable API. This has the whole gambit of what you'd expect to find in the OWASP top 10. Everything from numerous authorization vulnerabilities, authentication problems, excessive data exposure, all sorts of problems are here with this application. If you want to learn more or actually do this yourself, the OWASP API Security Top 10 project, which I was a contributor of, they've released crappy CRAPI, which is a deliberately vulnerable API. You can go and do this with your own organization's tools in a secure environment and see the results for yourself. And so this is a generic scan just pointed at a URL. It has all of the vulnerabilities, and over here on the right-hand side, we can see the only thing that it's picking up is there's potentially clickjacking. So out of the OWASP top 10, the thing that scanners typically are good at detecting in a generic situation like this is security misconfiguration. So any sort of signature on a web server, a specific header that's being sent back in a response, and in this case, the only thing that's being picked up is clickjacking potentially. This is the same thing here. What's being demonstrated is under the issues. You can see that there are 5,600 requests on the left-hand side and over 700 on the right-hand side. Meanwhile, those colored circles represent the number of issues and vulnerabilities that were discovered. Here, again, this is another system called VAPI. It's another deliberately vulnerable API with the whole gambit of vulnerabilities, and it's detecting none of them. So I wanted to give these scanners the benefit of the doubt. So I wanted to use them at their best. These are scans that are being performed with tokens. So this is an authenticated scan where all of this traffic was intercepted. And here you can see there are more results, but when you dig down into the details, again, we're seeing cookies without a header set, we're seeing potentially clickjacking, but we're not seeing the authorization vulnerabilities that let user A find user B's information, manipulate it, so on and so forth. We're not finding improper assets management where a different version of the API is exposed to the internet and unsupported. We're not finding a mass assignment attack where an attacker could go in and change the price of items in the store. We're just seeing some of these generic results from security misconfigurations, which, not to say those are not important. Those are important to discover and remediate, but the impact of the other vulnerabilities is so much more severe, and it's leaving these organizations exposed. So the key responsibility of enterprise vulnerability management programs are to make sure that the tools that they're using sufficiently test their attack surface. And so you need to make sure that whatever tools are in place to protect your APIs and to scan your APIs for vulnerability, that those are actually effective at doing that job. So what are the API vulnerabilities? This is from the OWASP top 10. uh, the API security project from 2023. I don't think we have enough time to dig into all of these right now, but I'll just touch on a few of my favorites. And here you can see that there's broken object level authorization. This is the case when user A is able to make a request and gather user B's information. And that can be as severe as seeing someone else's bank statements, their history, their health care, all sorts of things that one user should not be able to see from another user. Broken authentication. So this is the second most popular vulnerability for APIs, which in the case of Optus was the case for their breach. And authentication is just completely missing. So there are some API endpoints that don't require any authentication when they should. Anything that's not handling public data should have authentication in place. And the other thing that this vulnerability covers is the gambit of issues that can come up with API tokens. And so a JWT that exposes sensitive healthcare data or something like that. So JWTs are a very typical token that's used for APIs, and they're encoded. And there are still organizations out there that are mixing up encoding and encrypting. And so any of the tokens that are captured can be decoded. The information in there should not be sensitive information because anyone that gets a hold of it is going to find it. So no healthcare information, no passwords, nothing like that should be in these tokens. Also, if an organization is generating their own tokens, is the process that they're using to generate those insecure? So is it incremental or something like a token without a lifespan to where it can be used indefinitely into the future? Anything like that can lead to a severe impact where that token is stolen and reused in another request for data that doesn't belong to that user. Broken function level authorization. So if a user is able to interact with an administrator user's path or something like that. So if an organization has a private or an internal or admin path for their API, obviously that should be restricted just to the admins. And so if a regular user is able to gain access to that functionality, that would be a severe vulnerability. Unrestricted access to sensitive business flows. If we remember back a few years ago when no one could get a PS5, it's specifically from an API problem like this, where an attacker is able to write a script that can go through the path to purchasing a product, and that script can just purchase every single one that's available. And if you think of that instance where scalpers would gather every PS5 they could, and then they would try to sell it for twice as much, leaving Sony with no stock of PlayStations and a bunch of unhappy customers. So sensitive business flows should be locked down. You can have something like a CAPTCHA in between to try and slow down bot activity like that. Server-side request forgery, or SSRF. This is when an application accepts a URL as a parameter or input. And if an attacker is able to put in any URL they want, then if that's processed by the application, then they could use that maliciously to redirect your server to go and request something it shouldn't, or be used to reveal information that's sensitive and internal to the organization. So with these, you can think of a user profile. So maybe you can add a picture from another website, so they let you put in a URL to that picture and pull it from there. Anytime that's going on, the user input needs to be locked down so that an attacker can't successfully make a request to local host and find secrets or keys that are on the local server. In addition, they shouldn't be able to reach out to an out-of-band IP address to where something is being pulled back maliciously and an attacker is able to control the web server in that way. Improper inventory management, which is the way that versioning is used for APIs. So if an unsupported version of an API is available, and you can think of typical API request could be something like slash API slash v3 slash the resource that you're looking for. If v1 is available still and it hasn't been supported, then it could be vulnerable to all of the rest of these vulnerabilities if those were in an earlier version. And so there may have been a case when authentication was missing in version 1, and that was one of the major updates to version 2. So if an attacker is able to go back, request an unsupported version like v1 or internal or UAT environment, anything like that, and it's not supported to the same security level as the current version, then they can go in, use that old version to exploit the API for any of these vulnerabilities or more. All of the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities can fall into these three categories. Authorization, which is all about, user A interacting with user B's resources. Authentication, which is what we touched on earlier with APIs that should be locked down to have authentication, having it or having that missing. And trust. So this is any time when a user is interacting with the APIs and there's too much trust put on that, or when a third party's APIs are being consumed by the organization and that data is trusted more than it should be when it should be, sanitized just like any third party or user input should be. So I've talked about enterprise vulnerability management programs. Here are what the tools do for APIs. The classic tools for these programs that have been built around web applications for the past 20 plus years, and they're really good at what they do. They hit on security misconfigurations for APIs. They partially have been coming up to speed for authentication, SSRF, and information disclosure, but they've been missing authorization, excessive data exposure, so on and so forth. The reasoning behind this is the tools have to be specific to APIs. You can't just generically point a web application scan at an API and expect to get results. You need to point an API focused scan at an API to be able to detect these vulnerabilities. Authorization, for example, if you're just pointing a scanner at an API, well, is that scanner capable of creating a user account and authenticating and entering in all the correct parameters for the API? Probably not. It's going to take a lot more work to get that API set up correctly with the scanner and then make sure the scanner is focused on API vulnerabilities to be able to detect a lot of these. So, what can organizations do to help better protect their APIs? Well, from the start, just like any other aspect of a cybersecurity program, it needs to be addressed in policies, and APIs need to be inventoried. A huge problem in APIs, it's losing track of them. And so not having an inventory of all the endpoints and all the requests that are being made. And when that happens, maybe there's an acquisition or maybe part of the team is laid off or it doesn't work there anymore. And the version of the API that they supported now goes undetected. And then you run into some of those unsupported software vulnerabilities that can be critical to API security. So APIs need to be inventoried. You can't protect what you're unaware of. And so they need to be found, and then they need to be inventoried, and that inventory needs to be kept up over time. Authorization, we've touched on a bunch. User A should only be able to interact with user A's resources. They shouldn't be able to create, read, update, delete resources that belong to user B. Same thing goes on a group basis. So whether it's group A or group B, or even at the tenant level. So if there's tenant A, tenant B, all of those should be protected from being able to interact with the resources of others. Authentication, a lot of issues can be in place for authentication, so you need to check everything from weak passwords, password policies, rate limiting, so on and so forth. We've seen plenty of cases where in the web app you have to make a complicated password, 10 characters, symbols, numbers, all sorts of things. But we've intercepted that request, and you can make the same API request with a single digit. So now you have a password of 1, which no one has seen for years, where you're able to do something like that. But with the API, those same restrictions aren't being enforced. Test API tokens. Make sure you're not using a predictable process to generate the tokens. Make sure there isn't sensitive information. JWTs are encoded, they are not encrypted. Test for trust. Use the API as it was intended and analyze the response. That's something that I make a big focus in my course over at APPSEC University. Make sure that you are using the API as it was designed. And even from that perspective, you can start to see things like excessive data exposure where that API is sharing way too much information. Fuzz everything. So, don't just do a happy path test where you're giving the data that you're expecting to that API. Instead, send over all sorts of unexpected data to test for, how is the web server going to respond in certain situations. Earn confidence in the security of your APIs with proper testing. Don't be like all the other organizations that 75% of them are experiencing an API security incident and they're simultaneously confident in their API security. Take your tools and set up a deliberately vulnerable API in a safe environment and test your tools against them. See if they're able to detect these vulnerabilities that we've touched on. They shouldn't be coming up with 0 to no vulnerabilities when these apps are loaded with severe vulnerabilities. When you do that, you'll be able to see if your tools are coming up with false negatives. Once you've found those vulnerabilities, also cover it with penetration testing, bug bounty hunting, whatever else you have at your disposal to be able to test APIs properly. And then remediate your vulnerabilities and retest. Happy hacking, everyone. If you want to check out APPSEC University, it's completely free. You can scan the QR code here. We have over 10 courses, all API security related, everything from penetration testing to fundamentals. I have a course on the OWASP, but we have a new LLM-based course. You can check that out. Thank you for taking the time to stick with me through this presentation. If you want to find out more about hAPI Labs, you can scan this QR code here. Feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect. Thank you.